Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining me this afternoon. You have the pleasure of hearing my first ever presentation on any cruise anywhere at all. So I'm a little nervous. I was hoping that they would put the lights down, but they haven't. So just to give you a little background, my name is Mark Thorpe. I'm originally from England. I left England about 40 years ago and moved to Canada, and I've been living on various continents for the past 40 years, all working in the mining business. That way my wife calls me Brit-ish, because I'm not really British, but every now and then a little bit of something comes out. And away we go. So I'm actually, by training, I'm a disturbed ecologist. So I do ecology, but mostly in disturbed areas, and we'll have a look a little bit at that today. Richard, who was giving the presentation, and myself, we're doing a series of talks over the cruise. And you can see there, the talks that I'm going to be giving, most of the days are on the cruise, on the days at 1 o'clock in here, and there's just one exception on the 12th, it's at noon, and a couple of them are in the smokehouse. So that's the kind of the series of talks that we're going to be giving. Richard's and mine complement each other, and I think we work very well together. So we're delighted to have you along if you like this one. So looking at our journey through time, today we're going to look at a little bit of the history of San Francisco and the San Francisco Bay Area, and we're going to be looking also at the Gold Rush and the effect of the Gold Rush, had on the development of San Francisco. Now, most people, when they think of San Francisco, think of this picture of the bridge, they think of downtown and that sort of thing. But it gives you a whole different perspective when you start to look at it from the air. This satellite photograph gives us some very interesting things to look at. You can see here, shallower water. There's a delta from all the sediment that came down from these rivers. You can see the coastal ranges. And you can see the gray. All this gray is the urban population, which is hemmed in by the mountains. It can't expand any further. So when we look at the population graph a little bit later, you'll see that the population of San Francisco peaks out at about 1 million people, because you can't stuff any more into that little area right there. There's a few other things of interest. We'll have a look at these little colored bits down here, and there's a very interesting little marsh up here. So if we look a little more broadly at a graph of what's happening with the water in the San Francisco Bay, you can see, again, this is the main San Francisco Bay. The tributaries, the Sacramento and the San Joaquin River. But what you'll notice is that it's not just the river system. You've got all kinds of canals and channels that you can see through here, moving water for farmland, moving water all over the place. These red things that we've got are canals and piping. These are pump stations. The red squares are pump stations. So we take water from the various rivers, we move it around. You can see the water supply for San Francisco itself, water supply here for Oakland. And where we're going to be tomorrow is right about here when we dock, right in that area right there, on the Embarcaderos. If we look a little bit more on the geography of the bay and we look at the depths of water, you'll see again something fairly interesting. You've got less than 5 meters or 15 feet. So the bulk of the area within the San Francisco Bay area is less than 5 meters of water depth. This is from all the sediment that's been brought down from these rivers and deposited in these areas with little current, very little water flow. The bit that has moved out into this delta. And you can see the delta there, the one that we saw on the first photograph. The delta, it keeps developing, but the marine currents keep moving it away. This morning, Richard showed some of the faults And he said there were several faults fractured across. You can see the main San Andreas fault here coming through. But then there are other faults, fractures, going all the way across. And this has affected how the whole bay has developed. The flushing that we get from the tides keeps this nice and deep, obviously. And we can see here where we've got access to the main areas, but we can't get big ships way out here. This is mostly wildlife habitat, very interesting. So we're going to have a quick look at an area down here. This is the area of the salt ponds, beautiful colors as you can see. These salt ponds cover about 6,700 hectares, or 16,500 acres. Those salt ponds have been there since the Aloney people started to make salt before the white man arrived. They have been here, they've been developed, and they've been operated by a wide group of people. Initially, in the 1850s, they were developed to provide salt for the area. They're evaporated ponds. And since then, these small family operations have been consolidated under Cargill, one of the big fertilizer companies. Cargill produces most of the salt in the area. But there's been a push to get these back to a salt marsh. However, they do provide a very important bird habitat. This particular part of California is on the flyway from the north down to the south for the birds migrating from Canada and the northern US. And you can get up to 200,000 birds in a single one of these ponds during the migration season. So during the migration season, they stop off here. Some of them come through. You get canvasbacks, snowy plovers, ruddy ducks, and they all come down this Pacific flyway. They stop off here to feed. They stop off here to get more energy, and then they head on down south. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an introduction into kind of the larger geology and the water system of the bay. What I'd like to look at now is what was going on before the colonization of San Francisco and before the colonization of California. Here we've got the San Francisco Bay Area, and I want to look at three of the First Nations Native American tribes that existed in the area: the Nissan here, the Miwoks, and the Aloneys. The Nissan is important because they were in the area of the Gold Rush. This tribe had a fairly large area which overlays most of the valleys above Sacramento. They were hunter-gatherers. They picked berries. They fished the rivers. They shot deer with bows and arrows and all that kind of stuff. They've been there for probably, well, things are changing. The history says 3,500, 4,000 years. As we get to understand better the way the West Coast was colonized, that probably dates back to 8,000 to 10,000 years, if not even more. But the important thing about the Nissan is that they were right on top of the Gold Rush. We'll have a look at the effect of that later. If we look at the areas, this is primarily because this is the lands that we're going to be visiting and the lands that we'll be touring when we're there. This is the Aloney people. They were mostly in the southern part of the Bay Area. They were known as Costaños, which was costeños from the Spanish, costeños, which means people of the coast. They were living along the coast. The civilization was probably 3,000 to 5,000 years old, and they had 50 distinct territories, and now it's coalesced into the ones you can see here as the kind of the large groups, but the Aloney people now identify as a group. They were, this is an early drawing of what the Aloney people will go. There's a few interesting things here. You can see, obviously, with wearing cloth. It's woven, so this is probably post the contact this was taken. You can see chains of beads are around the person's neck here. And these people were living primarily on berries and acorns, and they were fishing. They were looking at seafood along the seashore, mussels. They would hunt birds. They would catch fish as the fish migrated up into the area. So a very diverse type of food source for the people, as they did. No agriculture originally. There was evidence of agriculture later, but it was mostly a hunter-gatherer people as they moved forward. They had fixed village locations, and this is an example of one of the huts that the Aloney lived in at the time. What you can see here is, you can see it's made of reeds and thatch. And what happened was they then moved out to camps. It's a little bit like going out to where you would want to go hunting, or you would want to go gathering, or if there was a salmon run coming in, you would move out from your area. You would go to your hunter-gatherer camp, and then you would gather up the food, store it for the winter, and then come back to where you were. Very interesting group of people, and they have a very strong group trying to bring the culture back. The Aloney people are bringing their culture back and working to do that within California. So I hope you get to see a little bit of evidence of that when you're on shore there tomorrow. The other group adjacent to us in the Bay Area and just on the north piece there was the Miwoks. The Miwok people lived adjacent to the Aloneys. They lived in small bands. They were a slightly different type of culture. They lived in small bands. And for some reason, they had domesticated dogs. And it's interesting that you can see that in this picture here. You can see the dogs that were domesticated. And they did this fairly early on. One of their key sources of food was acorns. They actually they used to do burning of the subfloor in the forests so that the ponderosa pines wouldn't come through as much, and they could keep the black oak, the black California oak, and they would then collect and gather the acorns. And it's actually an interesting food source that we seem to pass over today, primarily because it's got a tannin in it, which makes it bitter. You can leach the tannin out of the acorn, and then it becomes just like a peanut. You can then eat that. It's very high in fat, very high in nutrition, and it provided a good source of food for the Miwok people. A bit of a pastoral scene, painted by a person from the West. It probably wasn't as pastoral as that for the Miwok people when they were living there. They had to get through the cold, wet winters, and they lived mostly in shelters adjacent to overhangs and rocks. They didn't have originally the huts that we saw for the Aloney people. So that kind of gives us a bit of a picture of what we were looking at for the geology structure, now the people. So let's have a little bit of a look at the wildlife. And this is the one, I definitely borrowed this from somebody. As I mentioned, there were a number of people existing from fish and existing on fishing. And when we're coming into the bay tomorrow, we'll see the rest of the group here living on fishing. We've got harbor porpoises, harbor seals, and the California sea lion. The easy way to identify the California sea lion, and she'll be on the docks next to Fisherman's Wharf that we have to see them tomorrow, is they have a head that looks like a dog. In Spanish, it's Lobos del Mar, which is wolf of the sea, and that's exactly why it's the wolf of the sea. It's got that head that looks like that. We'll see a lot of bird life. We should see some pelicans. We'll almost certainly see these cormorants. The cormorants, these guys look like a duck that's sinking. Right? If you think about it, it's very low in the water, and they're a very good bird for fishing. And you quite often see them standing on top of a pier, drying out their wings so that they can get everything clean and nice. You'll see grebes probably tomorrow, and you may see these little guillemots, these little guys. These all are living on fish, so it's quite an interesting piece. And I just did want to, before we move on to the bay itself, I wanted to just quickly look at, give you a very high level. I'm going to do another ecology session later in the cruise. But the marsh and the estuary and the San Francisco Bay is all a transition. It's a transition from full marine ecology to full terrestrial ecology. But it goes through these very, very diverse and ecologically rich zones. The intertidal zone, right here, where you have eelgrass, which is really important for fish and crabs and all that kind of stuff. This gives the impression that there's oysters everywhere. There isn't, but obviously they only live in certain habitat. But then you get kind of taller grasses, this marshy plain. This marshy plain that you see here was very much sought after for cattle grazing. It's very rich. And we'll look at one of the marshes that's been affected by cattle grazing. What we did was we put a berm here, we put some drains into here, and then we set the cattle loose, and we lost that ecological functioning piece of the marsh here. So we'll see that as we go through. And just to give you a little bit of an idea, there is hope. The area of marsh that I'm talking about that was converted mostly into cattle grazing is in up here, but there are some ecological zones and ecological preserves that we've got around the area. There are a few other things that we might see of interest. This one is really dear to my heart. When I was a kid growing up in England, this was very rare. It's an osprey. It's very rare. But you may also see bald eagles, egrets, American avocets, and then we get on to some of the guys that I'm hoping to see. This thing, the elephant seal. We do have elephant seals in the bay, and I was reading some studies recently that these are one of the few species that actually call things they call out their name. They only say one word, and it's their name. And apparently in the herds, these big males with the big proboscis on the end, they go around going, Eric, and then Peter, and they go around and they call out their name. And this is a recent study that just came out. It's fascinating that somebody would actually be able to understand that they were calling, calling people by name. These are obviously cold water mammals. They've got a very fat. They're fat. They've got a lot of blubber on them and a lot of insulation. This is another guy that you might see tomorrow. Sea otter. These don't have fat. These are a very interesting species. They have a very, very dense fur. Up to 1 million hairs per square inch. I know, I didn't count them, but somebody did. And they use that to keep warm, that layer, and that's why you'll see them always grooming, always keeping their fur in very good condition. These were almost hunted to extinction in the 1800s, but they have made a comeback, and they're really important in keeping control of urchins and other things that eat the eelgrass and eat the kelp. These guys will eat about 1/3 of their body weight per day in seafood. It's about 30 pounds for an adult male of seafood a day. That's a Home Depot bucket full of clams, to give you an idea how voracious they are. But they're very important. They're a very important species, and what we found was when they reintroduced them all the way down the coast, even onto the British Columbia coast and down the Oregon coast, they found that the biodiversity in the areas into which they've been introduced increases because you remove the predators that are affecting the kelp and affecting the other seaweeds on the ocean floor. It's quite an interesting species in the ecosystem, and it's an indicator of good ecosystem health. We may also see some whales. In this particular case, we've got grey whales, and we may also, if we're very lucky tomorrow, see some dolphins. I'll have a little bit of a look more about dolphins and whales in my speech on charismatic megafauna. So please hang around to have a look at that. So have a look around tomorrow. You'll almost certainly see the birds. You may see ospreys. My wife and I we have a home in Los Cabos, and we went there. There was a very rainy area, and there's an area where the estuary flows through into the ocean, and it's backed up behind a small sand dune. And there'd been a cut through the sand dune, and all the fish were in behind the estuary. And we spent about an hour just watching ospreys come down, fish, and take the fish back to the nest, and then come down and fish again. And we were also lucky enough at the same time that we saw pelicans working in a group. And they were working in a group, and there were probably 15 or 20 of them. And they kind of corralled all the fish, and then they all got to the same spot. And then all of a sudden they all stuck their beaks in and then came up again, and they were all with fish. And then they all went back around again and worked their way through that. So hopefully we'll see those when we get into San Francisco. We may see the marine mammals. We will see sea lions, harbor seals, I'm almost certain of that. And hopefully we'll see a few of the other things. So, having looked at kind of the geography, and then a bit of the sociology, and now we've looked at what the animals we're looking at, and I didn't go too deeply into the ecology of things just yet. More on that for my final talk. Let's have a look at what happened before the gold rush. So before the gold rush, San Francisco was a sleepy little place. It was obviously the Aloney and the Miwok people were living there. They were in harmony with nature. They were using the traditional methods to catch fish, to catch game, etc. And it looked a little bit like this. But it was called Yerba Buena in the area. It had a population of about 200 people, mostly fur trapping. Sea otters that I spoke about. A little bit of subsistence, and it looked like that. Then this fellow, William Richardson, that you can see on the left-hand side here, came along in about 1835. He was an entrepreneur, early California entrepreneur, and he built a house on the edge of the water there. And in an area what is now called Portsmouth Square, I'll show you that later. But he built that little house and started to set up he was an entrepreneur, so he set up a little bit of trading, did a little bit of this and that. And then what happened was this. 1848. In early 1848, January, there was a guy called Marshall. I know it's Marshall because that's my brother-in-law's name. And they were working to build this mill. And this mill was in an area of farmland, and it was an area that needed to be able to grind grain down to flour. So they wanted to build a mill. And here's a view of the mill right now. It's a replica, of course. And you can see here, there's a water wheel underneath, which would then have driven a millstone on the top. Well, Marshall, when he was not looking around at the mill on the construction, was also looking in the river. And he discovered in the creek right down here some flakes of gold. And those flakes of gold were the start of the California Gold Rush. Sutter's Mill is right here. And if you look around the ancestral homelands of the Nissan, we're right about here. So they found this gold, and it was in January the 24th, 1848. Why do I say that? Very important. Because the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed in Mexico City on February the 2nd, 1848, just 8 days later, which transferred California to the United States. They had no idea that the gold rush was just about to start. Marshall took this flake of gold, they sent it off, and apparently that very flake of gold that we see here, the original one, is in the Smithsonian in Washington. It's in the National Museum of American History. Now, if you believe that, I don't know. It could be true. I'm not prepared to stake my life on it. So the gold rush, there's gold in them there hills. Remember where we are, we're in Sacramento. How do we get to Sacramento? There's no railroad, there's no nothing. We have to come through San Francisco. And we have to go and find the place where the original sleepy village with the little 200 people this was in 1846. We believe that was from 1846. That was the same property in 1851, 5 years later. And remember, this is not even where the gold rush is happening. Okay? This is just this thing, this little Yerba Buena Island, is the same Yerba Buena Island that we can see here. But we've got a slightly different number of ships, and goodness me, I wonder who was making the money and who did the plumbing. The population of non-natives went from 14,000 in 1848 to 220,000 in 1852. 14,000 to 220,000 in 1852. 4 years, the population more than 10 times, almost 15 times the population. Tens of thousands of people. I don't know how they organize sewage, water, garbage collection. I have no idea. Anyway, many people also settled up in Sacramento, near Sacramento, a place now called Coloma, California. Coloma was a Nissan word for beautiful. It was Kuluma, which is the old Indian name. So the gold discoveries came on, and 300,000 people descended on California. I know it doesn't sound a lot for us, but when you started with 14,000 and you're where you are now, it's quite a lot. And here's a little picture of it a little bit later. You can see the houses coming further and further up the hill as we go forward. So the rush is on. We come in from New York on sailing ship. We come in from everywhere. We come into San Francisco, and then we make the trek up to Sacramento, and then into the gold fields. Going into the gold fields, quite interesting. Gold recovery from these placer deposits has not changed that much. This is what a modern day placer mine. When we say a placer mine, what that means is gold in river deposits, river sediments. Okay? You dig up the river sediments, right here. You just notice the difference in scale, that's all. You dig up the river sediments, you stick them in this little hopper here. There's a water spray, and it goes through this thing called a trommel. Not that you really have to remember what a trommel is, there's no test at the end of the conversation here. But there's a spray that cleans all the mud off it, and it lets the rocks go out of the end. See here we've got all the rocks. All the fine material goes through and onto a sluice. Gold is very heavy. Gold goes out onto the sluice. They've got little riffles and something called miner's moss and all kinds of stuff. There's a big art to this. And those of you who've seen Gold Rush on the television, That's what it is. It looks just like that. So it comes down here, they clean off the mats, and they get the gold. Let's step back 175 years. We have a loader here, we have a sluice, and we have material where we collect the gold. Exactly the same things they're doing today, they were doing in the 1850s. I think this lady is the lunch delivery, and you can see there, she doesn't look very happy about it, but you know, that's the way it is. But these sluices are very easy to set up. They were able to come in, they were able to stake their claim, set up the sluices, and start to make money. I don't know who really made money. I think it was the one selling the beer and the eggs, but everything else. And there you can see the gold pans, and this was the gold pans. So they would pick, shovel, wash it, and they would take the gold out. And it got very, very busy. And this is from the 1850s into 1860s. This is in California. This guy here with the top hat on, I'm not sure what he's doing. He's probably trying to philander or something because he's got a white shirt. Miners never have white shirts. I've been a miner for 40 years, and we never have a white shirt. But you can see here sluices, right? You see a boat. You see another machine here. They were starting to get pumps. They were starting to get steam pumps, and they had to get fuel for the steam pumps. The steam pumps here burned wood, and they had to sluice with these steam pumps. So they were sluicing the material into the bottom. They put it over a big sluice. They catch the gold, and then this is what it looked like. That was where the land used to be. This is where the river was, and they've eroded all of this material. A lot of that material ended up in San Francisco Bay, by the way. If we take a step forward, 175 years to where I used to work in Venezuela. This is this year. This is a place called Las Cristinas. It's in the jungles in southern Venezuela, in Estado Bolívar. Guess what? You got the same thing. You got a guy with a hose, pumping up to a sluice, and the whole area is a mess. There's about 50 square kilometers of jungle being stripped out in this area in southern Venezuela. Same what we did to the Nissan lands up in Sacramento. Unfortunately, we haven't learned too much as we go. So there is a price to gold from these kind of operations, I'll say, from these kind of operations. Sediment movement into the river. You've got deforestation. And it's interesting. In South America, some of the mines I've worked on in South America, the reason they had to shut down was because they couldn't get fuel for the steam boilers. And I was working at a gold mine in Ghana, and I was looking at a map, and I saw this straight line on a map. And I thought, there's no straight lines on maps. Nature doesn't have straight lines. Well, it does, but not very many of them. So I went with my crew, and I went and had a look at this straight line, and it turned out to be an old rail bed. And it was about 30 miles, 45 kilometers from the mine, and they built a railroad to bring timber into the mine to power the steam engines and to build the underground mine. That mine eventually shut down because it was no longer economic to bring the timber in. Not because there wasn't any gold, not because there weren't any people. It's just that they couldn't get the wood into the place. You get mercury contamination. When I worked in Venezuela, the guys would have a little vial of mercury that they would hang around their neck, and after they finished panning, they'd throw the mercury in there and to collect the gold, because mercury is one of the few things that actually dissolves gold. So don't get mercury on your ring. Or then you'll be able to find out whether your husband actually bought you a gold ring or not. You had some habitat destruction, towns and cities. And then this was a big one up in the Sacramento area. There was a conflict between mining and agriculture. We saw there the mill that we got, and we had a conflict there. So we have that legacy. There was another legacy as well. San Francisco opened up. San Francisco opened up as a center for development, a center for trade, a center for commerce. And you can see the population growth here. This is where we were. Each one of these is 5 million. You can see the post-World War II boom. And then it just went straight up. Northern California up here, Southern California down on the bottom. Los Angeles overtakes California in 1910 as the largest city in California. Quite an interesting little piece there. And then you can see there in 63, California was then the most populous state in the US going forward. If you've got all of those people, you've got to find them somewhere to live. And the best thing that we do is we use all the flat land that we can, and then we build out into the ocean, right? We saw it in Victoria. We're going to see it in San Francisco. The house that was first built in that first drawing that we saw was built somewhere around here, right on the shore. This is downtown. All of downtown is built on fill. You can see this is, I think, this is slightly off. It needs to be rotated a little bit up. But this is Pier 5. We're coming in at Pier 27, which is somewhere over here. So this is all the downtown area, and you can see the ships that remain buried under the streets in that area. They've just been built right over the top of. And these are old ships that are actually still present in the area. Whether they'll ever get around to excavating them or not, I don't know. It's interesting, because I'm from England, I take quite a bit of interest in London. And you know that every time in old London, when they start to excavate for a building site, they're going to come across something that delays the project for 5 or 6 years while the archaeological excavation is done. I think this would be the same thing in here. It's going to be very interesting. But the population growth was phenomenal. This was around 1900, 1940, 2010. And the only reason, remember I said, it doesn't go any further right here, is because there's a big range of mountains. You can't build on them. So we're limited on area, we're limited on space. And I just wanted to give you a couple of shots of the early construction here of the bridge. Very interesting construction. You can see the old ferries going underneath. And you can see the pier here that they built out to build the base as it goes forward. So quite an interesting way. This is a suspension bridge. This particular type of suspension bridge is seldom built these days. The Chinese just opened one. It's not the biggest suspension bridge in the world. They're using a slightly different method of construction. It's more akin to the Bay Bridge, which is like this, which has got, it's called a cable stay bridge. It's a slightly different development. So moving on, we've had a look at that. We've had a look at the development of the city and the people, and we just got a little bit of work to do on now how we can do a bit of restoration on the land. About 85% of the wetland habitat was lost in the area. I mentioned some of the marshes that were turned into farmland, cattle ranging, cattle grazing, that sort of thing. And the San Francisco Bay people have taken this very seriously. You can see here, this is a salt pond. You can see the levee that I spoke about, the drain that you've got, so you can make use of this area here. And what we've done is they've initiated about 50 different projects, many of them aimed at restoring habitat. The habitat, you can see here, is a total of about 8,000 acres. It's about probably 3/4 of that 8,000 acres is toward tidal marshes. Tidal marshes are extremely important for migrating birds. They're extremely important for invertebrates. It's a part of this ecosystem that kind of cleans everything up. It kind of makes everything better. The water comes in, it gets cleaned up. This tidal in and out means that you get very high productivity. Biodiversity is very high. So you can see these projects are all based on that, and they're scattered throughout the Bay Area itself. So you've got, remember I showed you the salt marshes earlier on in the talk? We've got all the way up here, we've got projects. This is where I think they could do a better job. I think they need to restore some of that marsh area in here, because I think that would be fantastic bird habitat as we go. However, that's for the politicians and the people to decide. I'm just a mere ecologist opining from the stage for the first time. Okay, so with that, I would like to thank you all for spending part of your afternoon with me. It's been a real pleasure to meander through marshes and meander through the gold rush. Both Richard, who was speaking this morning, and myself have a background in the mining business, so we're always happy to discuss gold and the price of gold, especially at 3,500 plus where it is right now. So we're delighted with all of that. The speeches that I'm going to be giving, the lectures that I'm going to be giving later in the week, every second day except for towards the end when we go through the Panama. All of them at 1 o'clock except for this one on the 12th, which is at noon. And I do have to put on a cowboy hat once or twice because we're going into the smokehouse for a more intimate setting, right? Rather than everybody sitting so far away from me, they can get to the bar immediately after my presentation. So with that, this is my favorite animal on the planet. I love them. They're voracious eaters, but they're a very important part of the ecosystem. So think about that. They've brought this back. There's a place in California called Elkhorn Slough, which was a disaster. They brought the sea otters in, and now it's become a diver's paradise because they've got control over the species who are destroying part of their habitat. So you've got to have this mix of ecosystems. So with that, I would like to say thank you very much, and please have a good look around as you enjoy San Francisco. And at that point, I'll take any questions.